How are you?
Pretty good, actually. We have got a great guest joining us today here on our big program, and she is fantastic. She is just amazing. She's done all sorts of different things. Board-certified psychiatrist, internationally renowned as the terrorist therapist. Since 9/11, Dr. Liberman has been helping families keep calm and carry on in the face of terrorism. She's got a fantastic, fantastic book, Lions and Tigers and Terrorists. Oh my, How to Protect Your Child in a Time of Terror. She has also got a fantastic website, Expert Witness, forensic psychiatrist.com. She joins us today here on our big program. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the different news going on. I want to first of all start with this shooter, the synagogue massacre that took place. Give us your thoughts and feelings on this.
Well, first of all, of course, it was incredibly tragic. And it is sad to think that, we no sooner had we been done with the pipe bomber. I mean, there was hardly a time to take a breath in between the pipe bombs and the synagogue shooter. And at very basic level, what it shows is that there are a lot of people with mental illness in this country, well, all over the world for that matter, but there are a lot of people in this country who have very significant mental problems who are not getting treated. Now, the pipe bomber was, he actually has a more serious and typical kind of mental illness. I've been sort of trying to figure out whether it's paranoid schizophrenia or manic depressive illness, also called bipolar, because a lot of what he was doing or there's actually a combination of the two, schizoaffective schizophrenia, which kind of combines the two. But these problems, these mental problems, his family noted when he was younger, actually from the time at least that he was a young teen. And his father left. His father was Filipino, and he returned to the Philippines, abandoned him, and that's when the family started noticing that he had these more serious problems. Now, why they didn't get him into treatment when he was a young teenager, so far what I've been reading about is that he just didn't want to go. Well, when you have a young teenager and he doesn't want to go to get mental health treatment, and you see that he has various problems, you don't take no for an answer.
We've got a great guest with us today. She joins us live here on our big broadcast here on The Mix, and Carol Liberman joins us. Now, how could this shooting have been stopped? Could this have been stopped at all, Carol?
Well, you're talking about now the synagogue shooter.
Yes.
Well, I mean, everyone who's been interviewed says that he was such a plain man. I mean, they didn't recognize that he had all this hate in him, that he had all these guns that he was carrying around, and so on. He did make quite evident what his feelings were, however, on the social media platform Gap, and he called himself one dingo. A dingo is a wild dog, a feral dog. So he was trying to give people warnings, and he had a lot of anti-Semitic, all his posts pretty much were anti-Semitic. So if people were watching that, they might have, sent someone out to talk with him. But that website, or that, which I understand is being taken down or maybe taken down, and for how long, I don't know, because it is kind of freedom of speech. But in any case, if, people were watching that, and particularly his last post when he said that he was going in, of course, at that point, it was a little late to find him if they hadn't been tracing him already. But, these are people who want both the pipe bomber, and the synagogue shooter were people who, besides having mental illness, or because of having mental illness, they weren't really able to be very successful in life, and they were loners, and they felt sort of left out, and didn't get the American dream, and that is very typical of the type of person who then becomes a domestic terrorist. And that's what each of these people were essentially doing. So, one of the things that really must be said, though, is that when the pipe bomber was caught, and they saw all his decals and so on, and they blamed the whole thing on Trump, that he was a Trump fan, and apparently he sort of glommed onto Trump as the father figure he didn't have, and okay, but Trump never told him to go out and do these things. But then the man who shot up the synagogue, they're blaming that on Trump as well, even though he didn't like Trump. So, this whole, and yet everyone is talking about how what we need to do to stop all of these things is to calm down the rhetoric and everybody love each other and sing Kumbaya and all that, which would be very nice. But at the same time, and they want to blame Trump for keeping up the rhetoric, and yet at the same time, we have all the what Trump calls fake news, doing that as well. I mean, you on the radio, on television, everyone is, while they're saying to tone it down, they're still putting in their 2 cents about, who they think is to blame and why they're to blame and all of that. So it's not toning anything down.
We've got a great guest with us today. She joins us live here in our broadcast, Carol Liberman, and she joins us today talking a little bit about the synagogue shooting. Also, we touched a little bit on the pipe bomber that was. I guess realistically, last week's news. This week's news, of course, is this synagogue shooting. From a medical perspective, what do you make of these two cases?
Well, I mean, one thing it points out, and we've seen this, of course, in many other cases. I mean, for example, the Parkland High School shooter. So many of these people, even in the case of the synagogue shooter, where people said, oh, they didn't notice anything. I mean, these were sort of neighbors, but he was living with his grandfather for a while who died. I mean, the thing is, people, I don't expect everybody to be a psychiatrist, but certainly people can work to try to get these people, work harder to get these people into the attention of mental health professionals. And it's just showing that, I mean, I mentioned Parkland because I mean, even what I was saying about the pipe bomber, that these problems were noticeable. In most cases, the problems were noticeable or are noticeable if you look closely enough. And people need to get into treatment. And that's really, that's, I mean, of course, the synagogue shooter is more sort of a common garden variety bigot, rather than having, I don't know that I'm not saying that he necessarily has schizophrenia or manic depressive illness, or anything any psychosis, any serious mental illness, but clearly things happened in his life that he blames on the Jews. I mean, the number one thing right now that precipitated the shooting this weekend was that he believed, well, and it was true, that this organization was a Jewish organization, was trying to help, has been for years, not just recently, but has been for years, trying to help refugees come into the country, because it started by helping Jewish refugees come into the country many years ago, and they've continued trying to help people to come into the country just because of caring about them, and identifying with them and so on. And he did not want this caravan, I mean, that was the precipitating factor. He did not want this caravan of migrants coming into the country. And here was this Jewish organization helping them, and particularly in partnership with synagogues, including the Tree of Life, around where he lived, around Pittsburgh. So that was the thing that triggered him, the immediate trigger. But really, he has been an anti-Semite for a lot longer than this migrant problem. So, there is always some trigger that ultimately brings these people out to do something more violent. And yes, so the key would be trying to stop them before a trigger comes that makes them act out.
We've got a great guest with us today. She joins us live here in our broadcast here on The Mix, Carol Liberman, and we are talking a little bit about some current news and different things of that nature. Now, one of the things that you're also involved in and have been involved in is you've been going on radio and television talking about the Me Too movement. Give us what your reaction to this movement and some of the different things as we hear about sexual harassment more in the workplace and online and everywhere else.
Well, switching hats to my forensic psychiatrist hat, expert witness, I have testified. I've been doing this work for over 20 years as an expert witness, and I have testified in countless sexual harassment cases on both sides. And sometimes, there is such a thing as sexual harassment. It does exist, and typically it's the men who are the harassers and women are getting harassed, although there are also male victims, either of women perpetrators or of men perpetrators. What I found in doing so many of these cases is that you can't just believe a woman or a victim. Let's just talk about women right now. You can't. You can't just believe a male victim either. You can't believe any victim. That's what the courts are for, and that's why they use expert witnesses to study the person, to do a psychiatric evaluation of the person, and to figure out exactly what was going on. So, although certainly, there have been many cases where there was indeed a man sexually harassing a woman, and the woman was right, and she had different things that she was able to show for why that did happen, and to show the emotional distress that it caused. But there have also been many cases where the women were either lying for monetary gain, it's called malingering. They have some secondary gain that they want. Typically it's money. Or it can be cases where the woman was having a consensual relationship with the man and expected him to leave his wife and for them to go off into the sunset together. And he didn't. And when he didn't, all of a sudden she cries sexual harassment. So that's one example. Another example, and this one I think was very much at work in the Kavanaugh case. Another example is when women aren't lying per se, they were sexually abused in their past, just not by the man who they're claiming abused them. Now, sometimes it is lying. They are aware that they were sexually abused in the past. They may not be aware that they are projecting this onto the man, but who they're claiming sexually harassed them. But that is often the case. So sometimes it's unconscious that they really do think that what the man did rose to the occasion or rose to the level of being sexual harassment or rape or whatever. But oftentimes it is or can be that it's a previous man who molested them, who raped them, and they, in their mind, have projected that unconsciously onto this current man. So it's really a complex thing, but the main issue with Kavanaugh was that I was appalled that just because a woman came out and said that such and such happened, which in her case I believe it was a previous man who did sexually abuse her in some way, but just because a woman, any woman, says that a man did this to her, that she has the whole Senate and the world listening to every word. I mean, if she would have claimed that and gone to a lawyer and claimed that, there would be a law if the lawyer thought that there was enough reason to believe her, which he might not have. If it wasn't this big, political issue. If it was just a run-of-the-mill woman who came to him, to a lawyer with this much evidence, many lawyers wouldn't even take the case. But for those who would, then that would proceed like a normal case where you file a complaint, the man gets a lawyer and he files an answer to the complaint. There are psychiatric expert witnesses on both sides, discovery to look for evidence and so on, and it goes like a normal, and there's a jury in the end, it goes before a judge and a jury, and the whole case is brought out, over weeks. These cases take weeks, not, sitting in the Senate for a day or two with the whole thing. Because it was just appalling that, it's so ironic. He's supposed to be, it's about who's going to get on the Supreme Court, when what they did actually showed you don't need courts. What do you need courts for? You can just say that somebody did something to you, and everybody's going to listen to it.
We've got a great guest with us today. She joins us live here in our broadcast, Dr. Carol Liberman. She is amazing, and she is giving us a lot of great insight on this topic, the Me Too movement. Now, you have been involved in talking about this on radio and television. What's been the reaction to when you say some of the different things that you say? What's kind of the critiques or feedback you've gotten?
Well, a lot of women are surprised, to hear a woman saying this, but and angry. I mean, I've had a lot of energetic debates, shall we say. A lot of women who got angry at the idea that I would bring up that there's any other possibility to these things other than, it's just women who are oppressed by men. Not to say that, yes, things like wage differences are real, and rape is real, and sexual harassment is real, just not in all cases, and not just because a woman says so. That's the point. It all needs to be investigated, and so, yeah, there are a lot of angry women out there. I was doing one interview, I think it was on CNN, where I don't remember the name of the woman who was arguing with me, but finally I just had to stop and I said, you're a very angry woman. There's nothing more to be said. And at that point, whatever I said, she was just blah, 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 blah. It was just, and it's hard over the radio to get the full view of this, but just her face, she was having, she was going to have a stroke right there on television. Not to make, I don't want to make light of this, but I don't think that anything much is gained by being so angry and not being willing to talk about all sides of this.
We've got a great guest with us today. She joins us live here in our broadcast, Carol Liberman. Now, Carol, as we go, my friend, where can people find you online and pick up your books and get involved with you?
Well, I know you gave out my expert witness website.
Yes.
You mentioned that I have a. Well, my book is Lions and Tigers and Terrorists, Oh My!
Yes.
How to Protect a Child in a Time of Terror. And I have become the terrorist therapist since 9/11. That is my passion, helping people, helping families keep calm in a time of terror. And terrorism, we've seen in these two cases, the pipe bomber and the synagogue bomber, in a sense, those are two types of domestic terrorists, and I write about that in my book as well. But this is the first and only book about terrorism for children. It describes terrorism in a very child-friendly kind of way, without making them scared, and that in a picture book for the kids.
Yes.
And the first half of the book is for grown-ups, for parents and teachers and therapists, to read how to talk to kids about terrorism, and that includes the kinds of things like the pipe bomber and the synagogue shooter. because, as I said, those are a kind of domestic terrorist. And so it really is, children are, well, families, people are under so much stress these days, and from all these different forms of terrorism. Even school shooters can be considered a kind of terrorism as well, because their aim is to create terror. So we are really suffering. It's no wonder that there are more people acting out with their mental illness, because there's been so much stress on us, so much, you can't turn on the media in any way without hearing people arguing with each other. And I brought that out as well. But I try to, as a psychiatrist, I try to give people insights into things, and because that is a big factor in helping people calm down. Whether it's understanding why the terrorists do what they do, I talk about that in my book. Understanding the reactions, I talk about different reactions that grown-ups and kids have to hearing about terrorism all the time in the media, and seeing the attacks and so on, hearing about the attacks, and about trials, and about all kinds of things going on related to terrorism. And we are, there's no doubt that we're having emotional reactions to this, even though people want to sort of deny it and think, oh, well, nothing like 9/11 is going to happen again. And of course it is happening, and it will be happening, continue to be happening. I was just reading this morning about an ad that ISIS is putting out with a picture of a man with a knife. His back is turned towards the camera, but you see him with a knife, and he's at a concert. And the article was about how ISIS is trying to perpetrate lone wolves, and they're trying to hit people who are mentally ill. People who are mentally ill are more vulnerable to getting worked up and joining ISIS, acting out on being lone wolves, because you don't have to.
Yes.
You don't have meetings. You don't have to go to ISIS meetings. You can just be influenced by them and create these acts of terror on your own. So these things aren't going away, unfortunately.
Well, Carol, I appreciate you making time for us today. Thanks for coming on our